why we will support the government.
Patrick Harvie, 6 minutes, please.
When the history of this dismal period in UK history comes to be written, this whole Brexit saga will no doubt be described as a tragedy in which a combination of the hard right and political spivs and opportunists who believe in nothing but their own entitlement to power managed to hack the democratic process to suit their own short-term interests at the expense of the whole UK and the European Union. There is nothing to like about this process, and those who simply fallen into line and become apologists for it won't deserve to be forgiven. That position on its own would be enough to reject the withdrawal agreement and the bill that seeks to implement it. On top of that, we have a clear democratic view from the people of Scotland, expressed not only in 2016, but in 2017 and 2019. They saw through the Brexit project and they rejected it. The members of this Parliament have a responsibility to respect that choice, as well as to safeguard the interests of Scotland, which will be done great harm by Brexit. That position would also, even before an assessment of the detail of the withdrawal agreement, be enough on its own to reject it and the bill that seeks to implement it. But today's debate also does need to address the detail of that agreement and the bill, every aspect of them, but in particular the state in which they leave the position of this Parliament and the governance of Scotland, the sovereignty of whose people is expressly denied by this bill. The changes in the withdrawal agreement and the bill from the previous version are all for the worse. We've heard about the watering down of the rights and protections for child refugees, some of the most vulnerable people in our society. We've heard about the block on an extension to the transition period, which again raises the spectre of pushing the country off the cliff edge at the end of the year. The moving of the level playing field provisions from the withdrawal agreement into the non-binding political declaration undermine workers' rights, environmental standards, the alignment with the European Union removed, and a few words in the Queen's speech are no substitute for the binding provisions that were in the earlier versions of the withdrawal agreement. The bill removes the requirement for the future agreement with the EU to be consistent with the political declaration. This is a direct threat to environmental standards, a threat that is all the more serious in the context of the many statements from members of the current UK government over the years, indicating their desire for a race-to-the-bottom agenda of deregulation and free market extremism. Let's be mindful that many of the people who are now in control of the UK government see people like Trump, Orban and Bolsonaro not as far-right threats, but as an ideological model to follow. Most disturbingly, the new bill deletes the scrutiny arrangements for negotiations on that future relationship with the EU. It implies that the UK government alone, without any form of democratic scrutiny or accountability, will decide unilaterally what its negotiating objectives will be. They'll keep draft texts being negotiated secret, and they will sign off any agreement on the say-so of ministers alone. Not only MPs, but we as members of Scotland's Parliament will be cut out of the process, leaving a government which was elected on 43% of the vote and which lost most of its seats in Scotland, able to impose its will regardless of the wishes and interests of the country. As for the impact on devolution, on Scotland's Parliament, on the governance of Scotland, the country we represent, the Secretary of State for Scotland has already indicated today in the House of Commons, words that were echoed, I think, by Adam Tompkins' speech today, that this legislation will be imposed on us regardless of our consent decision. We've had this debate about the meaning of the consent provisions before. Consent, if the principle is to be meaningful, it has to be freely given or withheld, it has to be revocable, and most fundamentally, it has to be respected. The UK has already legislated in devolved areas without this Parliament's consent, and therefore without Scotland's consent. They are poised to do so again now with this bill. In short, they're willing to go through the motions of seeking consent, but they don't give a damn whether they get it or not. There is no basis on which we can trust that they won't continue to do so again, absolutely whenever they see fit, whether on future controversial legislation or with the powers that they're taking as a result of Brexit, or indeed by constraining the freedom of the Scottish Parliament by way of trade agreements that cut through swathes of our devolved powers. They know that that will be consistent with the ideological bedfellows that they have in the Trump regime and the trade agreement that they want to achieve with them. Their intention to exercise power without scrutiny shown in this bill will no doubt be replicated in the trade bill when it returns. Scotland no longer has the devolved parliament it voted for 20 years ago because the principle of consent has been turned into a meaningless sham. We're being asked for consent under a clear threat that we will be utterly ignored. For this Parliament to give its consent in these circumstances would be supine, pathetic and entirely lacking in self-respect. We should oppose the amendment, oppose the bill and support the motion.
Call Willie Rennie for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Liberal Democrats will vote for the Scottish Government's motion this evening. We do not support the EU withdrawal bill. We do not support Brexit. It's what we said we'd